Peru, the site of one of the world's oldest civilizations, is witnessing what some have referred to as ethnic culling. The government campaign for the mass sterilization of rural women is threatening to wipe out the future of the Andean people. In our culture, women have always been fertile. There was never a woman who didn't have children. They all did. A woman who has children is always respected, even by her husband. And a woman who cannot bear children is looked down on. In our community, women have always been seen as good mothers. The campaign for sterilization targeted certain groups of women, those from poor Indian-speaking communities. In the Andean towns and villages, it's seen as a silent slaughter, the lives of future generations irrevocably severed. It was in hamlets like this that government officials and health teams slowly began to implement their plan. In 1996, no one suspected their motives. After all, this was a region founded on certain traditions. These Peruvian symbols of fertility are a testimony to what the family means to Peru's rural communities. Despite the high rates of child mortality, Andean women have large families. They believe a family size should not be determined by government policy. That is up to God. How many children have you got? 7. How many have died? 2. 4 died. How many are left? 7. Is this the youngest? Yes. Is that your last daughter? Yes, she is. And you can't have any more children. I don't know. The thread is forever. The thread is the name women give for a hysterectomy. Under the government's birth control program, which began in 1996, over 250,000 women in Peru have received the thread, many without their consent. They were often forced or blackmailed into being sterilized. It's a policy which has shaken Andean communities to their core. In the village of Pampamarca, another funeral is taking place. On a wooden stretcher, wrapped in a blanket, lies another dead child. The baby died of asphyxia during birth, a birth which also killed the mother. At the delivery, there was no medical assistance. In the foothills and surrounding villages, it's a growing trend that the locals are only too aware of. We are sad because the health center is going to close. How many more dead are we going to have? We hope that the center will reopen or we will die without any help. But help was never the government's intention. The health center in the village has remained closed ever since it accomplished its mission to sterilize the local women. From day one, the combination of regional and national campaigning coerced the women of Pampamarca into a terrifying situation. The ladies were told that once they had the thread done, they would not have any more children. The president gave a decree at a national level. It seems it was compulsory to do the thread to avoid big families. Restricting the size of peasant families became a true obsession for the Peruvian government. Posters appealing for family planning were everywhere. When that failed, some women were involuntarily and indiscriminately seized from their homes and sterilized, as mother of 5, Maura Quispe, recalls. She told me that I already had too many children, that the government and President Fujimori had sent specialists from Lima. She said that the injection and the pill were going to end, and if it wasn't for the thread, we would have too many children. It's been 2 years since I had the thread done. Despite local protests, the government saw the campaign for sterilization as a necessary part of Peru's development, and it continued. They even set new targets for the health centers, allegedly sending out further orders for enforced sterilizations. Maria Kleoff worked as an assistant nurse at a health center in Huancavelica. There, she obeyed strict instructions to sterilize as many women as possible. The supervisors gave the orders. They forced us to have 5 patients for the hysterectomy per campaign and per health technician. There was a health center in one village in which 15 patients had the operation in one day. One high-profile doctor refused to sterilize women against their will. Hector Chavez claims doctors are only the messengers. They're the orders from the ministry. An order comes from the top and it has to be obeyed. And what are the orders? That we need to have women sterilized. Although the plans for mass sterilization were taken at the highest level of national office, there's very little documented proof of the campaign. The only evidence was in a press statement issued by a regional health department in 1997, which states that health technicians were not to be paid for rounding up women for hysterectomies because it was compulsory. Some doctors, such as Hector Chavez, argue that this was not the case. For those professionals who went out campaigning, there was extra payment. At the end of the year, there was a competition to see which health center had performed the best, and prizes were given out. However, the head of Huancavelica Health Department is adamant that no sterilization program exists. We have a program of reproductive health and family planning, which includes all methods, but there is no such thread program. It's much easier to sterilize than to educate, to provide jobs or better health conditions. They opted for the easiest option. The Catholic Church was also opposed to the sterilizations. Father Humida was sure that incentives were indeed a factor. Some of those who work in family planning tell us that they received incentives in money and electrical utensils. They make reference to other doctors who have received more than they did. Seems pretty clear to me. If some rural communities had so far escaped the campaigning, the government radio broadcasts would pay to that. This one declares that for your children to be born strong and healthy, it's necessary to have at least 2 years between births. Let's avoid putting lives at risk, the announcer says. As the tradition of fertility in Peru is gradually eroded, it's anticipated that by the year 2050, the government will have halved the number of children born to women in rural areas. Festivals like this one will only have historical value. As the campaign gathered momentum, word spread through the hamlets of a travelling thread festival, where doctors perform thousands of free hysterectomies. The government message was unashamedly direct. You're too poor already to have more children, and because it's not Catholic to use other forms of birth control, you need to be sterilized. As pressure mounted to secure hysterectomies, some women were being humiliated to force them to consent. The nurses told me that I had too many children. They asked me if I was an animal to have so many children. That's why I had the thread. The nurse came to my house 3 times. Once in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. She said to me, "Why do you have to think twice when you can only think once? Have the thread done. It's not going to harm you." By now, the health workers were under pressure to fulfill their quota of sterilizations. If they failed, their own jobs could be at risk. Like many of her colleagues, Maria Kleoff struggled to convince many women. It was a requirement, an obligation. At the time, we were told that if we didn't achieve a certain number of patients, they would terminate the contract, and we would all have to go. But if some medical teams were finding it heavy going, the government had found another way of drawing in more patients. They used their own food aid scheme, PRONA, as a means of coercing women into sterilization. It was at these food distribution centers that many women heard about sterilization for the first time and succumbed to being sterilized in exchange for food. The PRONA ladies went from door to door throughout the community, inviting us to go to the program. There they gave a lecture and told us to get sterilized and stop using our own methods of contraception. There was a health center where porridge was distributed and where mothers were told, "If you don't get the thread, we won't give you any food." Some agreed, thinking maybe it was true. Others refused. The food aid program was designed to ensure that even in the poorest communities, young children didn't go hungry. Often the reward many women received for becoming sterilized was a lousy bowl of soup. Even so, many mothers took up the offer. How many women have been sterilized? I don't know how many, but there are many. This is a big village, and there are a lot of mothers. There are very needy people. It's a pity. It's a sad reality, but we are an overpopulated country. We need to have fewer births, so the government will do it with or without causing harm. And with such a policy, there are inevitable tragedies. At least 15 women have died from complications while undergoing sterilization. This video, made by a medical team, shows the suffering of a woman who becomes conscious when the anesthetic stops working. The doctor ignores her cries and continues with the operation. The woman died 2 days later. Others, like Madalena Reginaldo, survived just such an experience. I felt pain. They were cutting into me, and I wanted to get up. I said, "Doctor, it's hurting. What are you doing to me?" And he just told me the anesthetic wasn't working. Madalena lives in Huancavelica, one of the poorest provinces in Peru. On average, women here will have 9 children each. Jessica is Madalena's youngest daughter, and although she would have liked 2 more children, she was sterilized against her will soon after Jessica was born. Angry at the way she was treated, she still carries both the physical and the mental scars. I didn't want to be sterilized. Neither did my husband, because when a woman is sterilized, she stops being useful. At Jessica's birth, the doctor told Madalena she was a woman of high reproductive risk, and for her long-term health, it was vital that she should have a hysterectomy. The doctor said to me, "We can give you the thread." I said no, because I thought it would make me ill. He said that was only psychological, that the thread didn't hurt. I told him I was scared, but he replied that I was at high risk and that I could die. I said, "It doesn't matter if I die, doctor." Madalena surrendered to the doctor after her husband signed a consent form. The doctor arrived for my checkup and told me, "Tomorrow you'll have a surprise." I said, "What surprise?" "Tomorrow we'll give a hysterectomy. Your husband has already given permission, and you have to sign as well, to accept that you'll have no more children. Sign so that we can sterilize you tomorrow." "And you signed, yes? Why?" "I was told to do so. My husband signed, so I had to sign as well." The pressure on doctors to achieve more sterilizations took a new twist when they began targeting their own colleagues for sterilization. Maria Kleoff had failed to reach her sterilization targets and was now being singled out. The doctors told me that I already had children and that it would be better if I had a hysterectomy, that it might save my job. "You have nothing to lose. You didn't find any patients in 3 campaigns. You are going to leave anyway. If you have the thread, you'll keep the job." Faced with an ultimatum, the right to motherhood or the right to work for the survival of her family, Maria Kleoff made a difficult choice. I took the decision myself. I didn't consult my husband. I needed to work for the family, so to keep my job, I had the thread. In the end, it was a pointless sacrifice. 2 months after her hysterectomy, Maria Kleoff was sacked. But the Peruvian press now began to focus on the sterilization campaign, and under mounting pressure, eventually the government could not deny its existence. The organization Defense of the People condemned the government for these acts of brutality, a denouncement which seemingly forced them into making changes. Official figures indicate sterilizations dropped by more than 50% during the next 12 months. However, according to Father Hamida, the mass sterilizations have not stopped. Doctors have now found new subtle ways of achieving their aims. I know of several women who were sterilized against their will, some without even knowing it. They were conned into signing blank pieces of paper, the consent forms, without the doctor stating what it was for. Gregorio and Alfonso are devout Catholics. They have 9 children and have never accepted any form of artificial contraception. When Gregoria became a mother again at 40, the doctors recommended sterilization. She refused. They demanded I should be sterilized, but I didn't want it, and immediately refused. Then they told my husband, if you don't want your wife to be sterilized, you must have a vasectomy. He also refused. But a few hours after giving birth, Gregoria was taken to the local hospital where she was sterilized without her knowledge or consent. They told me that a piece of the placenta was still inside and it needed to be cleaned. I signed a blank piece of paper. After I signed, they took the details from my documents.
Y al día siguiente, mi esposa sentía dolores fuertes en la vientre.
The following day, my wife had tummy pains, and a relative who came to visit her saw the scar on her belly and told me she'd been sterilized. I signed to be cleaned inside, not to be sterilized. In such circumstances, families have little comeback. It's often their word against the hospitals. But someone who is prepared to fight on their behalf is a lawyer, Julio Tamayo. She's trying to prove that the government has violated human rights. I believe that the sterilization of women during birth, often without their knowledge, is masked by the increased number of cesareans. It's necessary that the real facts are known. Rufina Escobar is only 23 years old. This is her cesarean scar. She had it done when she was 6 months pregnant. It conveniently disguises the hysterectomy, which took place at the same time as the cesarean. In the emergency room, I was told, sign so that they can give you a cesarean. Sign, sign? What for? To have a cesarean done. My hand was shaking. Was it a blank paper? Yes, a blank piece of paper. I wasn't told it was for the thread. They made me sign, and I went into the operating theatre. The baby born by cesarean eventually died. It was a shock for Rufina to find out that she couldn't have any more children. I wasn't feeling well, so the obstetricians told me that they were going to consult my medical files. A lady explained I'd had a hysterectomy. When the doctor came to assess me, I asked him, "Why did you give me the thread?" I threatened to take legal action against him, but he said that he couldn't be arrested for what he'd done. Rufina only has one child, a 2-year-old boy. She's never pressed charges against the doctor, and like many Peruvian women, has remained silent about her ordeal. Peru's family planning program has been accused of consistently failing to gain signatures of consent. This is despite the government promising in 1997 to present every signed document. They were asked for the signatures of consent, but these have never materialized. Up to now? Up to now. They said it was confidential. We didn't want to know specific identities, only the documents that prove that there was a consent for each operation. As more women come forward, health department officials under pressure are adamant they can prove their legal responsibilities. I am a witness to how the program ran. In Huancavelica, I performed around 300 sterilizations. All voluntary? Of course. The women who are sterilized against their will do not have a gun pointed at their heads. They are, however, put in a situation where they have thought too little about it. Have you ever pressured a woman? No. All my patients did it voluntarily. Many times they asked that if I would perform the operation myself. I have never put pressure on a woman to be sterilized. Julio Tamayo aims to represent the women who were forcefully sterilized. She believes they are living proof that human rights violations did take place.
Los médicos peruanos y el personal de salud.
The Peruvian doctors and the health workers acted as though they were the police or the army. They did not follow the necessary ethical procedures of conscience. They put many people at risk. They are accountable, just like the police or the military, for following orders which go against human rights. Father Hermida goes one step further in his criticisms. Obviously, I can't read the mind of the government, but the intention is very clear. Go and achieve the goals, and the goals are hundreds, thousands. We have been depopulated by a mass sterilization. It is killing the people. It's genocide. There is a serious contradiction here. On the one hand, if we reduce the number of poor people, we reduce poverty. On the other hand, we are told the population living in extreme poverty is not growing anyway. I believe the government has to decide whether to carry on with sterilizing the region's women. If it continues like this, they will kill the Peruvian mountains. Peru is a country founded on the splendid traditions and glories of the past. But in their commitment to the new gods of modernization and progress, Peru's leaders are in danger of losing touch with this heritage. Their pursuit of Western ideals could bring with it the loss of perhaps Peru's greatest treasure. The program.